A crisp morning sun peeks through the trees, casting a golden glow over a quiet, small-town coffee shop. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifts through the air as a few early risers shuffle in and out, grabbing their morning fix. The faint hum of idle chatter and clinking cups fills the cozy atmosphere. Sitting alone at a corner table near the window is Jack Henderson, 50s, a rugged yet composed man with sharp, observant eyes. His posture is relaxed but upright, a hint of discipline in the way he carries himself. He wears a well-worn leather jacket, his faded jeans hinting at a practical lifestyle. His short-cropped hair, streaked with gray, and the subtle scars along his knuckles tell stories of a past he rarely speaks of. Jack sips his black coffee, his gaze flicking toward the people around him. He doesn't make a habit of standing out. He never has. Years of military service taught him the power of quiet strength. But even here, in this small town he now calls home, the ghosts of his past still whisper in his ear. A soft chime signals the entrance of another customer. Jack looks up, instinctively scanning the new arrival. It's a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in designer clothes that contrast sharply with the humble setting. Her short, manicured nails tap impatiently against her phone screen as she steps in. Her perfectly curled blonde bob remains still despite her brisk movements. This is Karen Winthrop. She wears entitlement like an expensive perfume, exuding an air of superiority as she surveys the room with barely concealed disdain. The barista, a college-aged girl named Lindsay, offers a polite smile as Karen approaches the counter. Lindsay, good morning. What can I get started for you today? Karen doesn't return the greeting. Instead, she sighs dramatically and places her designer purse on the counter as if it's a burden. Karen, a non-fat, triple-shot caramel macchiato. Extra hot. And make it quick. Lindsay maintains her professional smile, but there's a slight hesitation before she punches in the order. Jack notices. Years of reading micro-expressions have trained him to pick up on discomfort like a sixth sense. He watches as Karen's impatient fingers drum against the counter while Lindsay prepares the drink. Lindsay, that'll be $6.75. Karen scoffs, rolling her eyes. Karen, $6.75? For a coffee? Unbelievable. No wonder this place is barely staying in business. Jack tenses but remains silent, observing. Lindsay, flustered but polite, waits for Karen to pay. The transaction is made, but not without an audible highway robbery muttered under Karen's breath. Jack sips his coffee, shaking his head slightly. He's seen people like her before. People who take up space with arrogance, who believe the world owes them something. He's learned not to engage. But as Karen turns, her sharp gaze lands on him. A slight pause. She narrows her eyes, scrutinizing his appearance before making a disgusted face. Karen, I really wish places like this had a dress code. Some of us actually care about appearances. Jack exhales slowly, his fingers tightening around his mug. He's been insulted before. He's been called worse by people who actually mattered. This is nothing. And yet, something about Karen's sneer, the blatant dismissal, the sheer audacity, strikes a nerve. Still, he stays quiet. Lindsay places the drink on the counter with a nervous glance between the two. Lindsay, here's your macchiato, ma'am. Have a great day. Karen doesn't acknowledge her. She snatches up the cup, inspects it with exaggerated scrutiny, then, Karen, ugh, are you serious? I said extra hot. This is lukewarm at best. Jack watches as Lindsay's face pales. The young girl stammers, reaching for the cup. Lindsay, I can remake it for you. Karen slams the cup down onto the counter, liquid splashing over the lid. Karen, you should have done it right the first time. Honestly, do you people have any standards? Jack sets down his mug. A familiar sensation tightens in his chest. Something long buried. Something that tells him to stand. Jack, that's enough. Karen turns sharply, an incredulous look plastered across her face. Karen, excuse me? Jack holds her gaze, steady and unwavering. Jack, she's doing her job. You don't have to like it, but you don't have the right to treat people like dirt. For a moment, silence hangs between them. Then, Karen laughs sharp, mocking. Karen, oh please. And who exactly do you think you are? Some washed-up, old man who thinks he can lecture me on manners? Jack doesn't flinch. His voice remains calm, measured. Jack, to someone who believes respect should go both ways. Karen scoffs, but there's something behind her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, as if she's not used to being challenged. Karen, whatever. I don't have time for this nonsense. She turns back to Lindsay, pointing a manicured finger at the coffee machine. Karen, fix my drink. Jack watches as Lindsay hesitates, clearly shaken. His fists clench under the table, but he forces himself to remain composed. He knows better than anyone. The worst kind of bullies are the ones who think they're untouchable. And Karen? She thinks she's untouchable. The tension in the coffee shop lingers in the air long after Karen's outburst. A few patrons throw Jack sympathetic glances, but no one dares to intervene further. Lindsay, flustered, tries to smooth things over by remaking Karen's drink as quickly as possible. Jack remains seated, his gaze steady, but inside, a familiar frustration simmers beneath the surface. Karen Winthrop isn't just any self-important woman with an attitude. She's a name in this town. Her husband is a real estate developer with connections to the local government, and she never lets anyone forget it. She throws around entitlement like it's a currency, expecting everyone to bend to her whims. She's on the town's social committee, the HOA president of her gated community, and a frequent guest speaker at charity events where she pretends to care about people less fortunate than her. But in reality, she sees most people as beneath her, especially those who, in her mind, don't measure up to her standard of class. And today, she has decided that Jack Henderson is one of those people. Initial conflict scene. Karen takes her freshly made macchiato, now steaming to perfection, and turns back toward Jack, as if she isn't quite done making her point. Karen, smirking, voice dripping with condescension. You must be new around here, or at least new to understanding how things work. Jack doesn't respond immediately. He takes a slow sip of his coffee, unfazed. He spent too many years learning patience, learning when to engage and when to let someone dig their own grave. Karen, tilting her head, feigning curiosity. You look like you've been through a lot. Were you some kind of handyman? Or a drifter? Jack exhales through his nose, setting his mug down. Lindsay shifts uncomfortably behind the counter, while a few nearby customers pretend not to eavesdrop. Jack, calm, unwavering. Just a guy having his morning coffee. Karen chuckles, shaking her head as if she's dealing with a child who just doesn't understand. Karen, oh, that's cute. A man of few words. But let me give you a little advice, sweetheart. She leans in slightly, voice lowering as if she's sharing a secret. This town has a certain standard. People like me, we set that standard. And people like you. She gestures vaguely at his worn leather jacket, his sturdy but unpolished boots. Well, you don't exactly fit in. Jack doesn't flinch. He's been spoken to like this before, by officers who didn't respect him, by politicians who saw soldiers as pawns, by civilians who never understood the sacrifices men like him made. He's seen real power. Karen Winthrop? She's playing dress-up, but she isn't done yet. Karen, leaning back, eyes gleaming with superiority. You know, my husband's on the town's zoning board. He's got a lot of say over who gets to stay in this town and who's just passing through. A veiled threat. Lindsay gasps quietly. Even the other customers exchange uneasy glances. This isn't just an insult. It's a warning. Karen is making it clear that she can make life difficult for him if she chooses. Jack, still composed, looks up at her, his expression unreadable. Jack, you always talk to strangers like this. Karen's smirk grows wider. Karen, oh, only when they don't know their place. The words hang in the air, thick with meaning. Jack tightens his jaw. He knows what she's implying. A part of him wants to laugh. Another part wants to remind her that he's faced down real threats, that her brand of small-town intimidation is nothing compared to what he's endured. But he doesn't take the bait. Instead, he simply nods, a slow, knowing nod that unsettles Karen more than she expected. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to cower, to get flustered, to argue. But instead, he just looks at her, like he's seen 1,000 people just like her before, and none of them mattered. Building empathy. Karen isn't used to being ignored. Her smirk falters for just a moment before she recovers. She huffs, tossing her hair back. Karen, well, I suppose there's no fixing some people. Just know that certain types don't last long around here. With that, she turns sharply on her heel and struts out of the coffee shop, her expensive heels clicking against the tile. As soon as she's gone, the air seems to loosen. Lindsay lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. A man at a nearby table shakes his head. Someone else mutters, "She's unbelievable." But Jack, he just takes another sip of his coffee, like nothing happened. Lindsay approaches cautiously, her voice hesitant. Lindsay, sorry about that. She does that to a lot of people. Jack offers her a small, reassuring nod. Jack, you don't have to apologize for her. Lindsay hesitates, then bites her lip. Lindsay, she thinks she owns this town. If she doesn't like someone, she makes their life miserable. She's gotten people fired, gotten people's businesses shut down. I just want to say, be careful. Jack studies her for a moment. The young woman is earnest, genuinely concerned. And that bothers him more than Karen's words. The fact that this town is afraid of someone like her, that's a problem. He gives Lindsay a reassuring smile. Small, but genuine. Jack, don't worry about me, kid. But as he picks up his coffee again, his thoughts turn over Karen's words. People like me? We set the standard. My husband's on the zoning board. Certain types don't last long around here. Jack has spent most of his life letting things roll off his back. But there's something about this town, about the way Karen holds influence over it, that doesn't sit right with him. And something tells him this isn't over. Jack Henderson doesn't go looking for trouble. That much is clear. But trouble, it seems, has a way of finding him. After his encounter with Karen at the coffee shop, he goes about his day as usual. He spends the morning at the local hardware store, picking up supplies for some repair work at the small rental cabin he's been staying in. The town itself isn't bad, quaint, quiet, the kind of place that could be peaceful if not for people like Karen poisoning the well. Jack keeps to himself, offering nods of acknowledgement to the locals, but never lingering too long in conversation. Some notice his disciplined posture, the way he scans a room without even realizing it, always positioning himself with a clear view of the exits. A few of the older men in town recognize something in him. A stillness, a control that only comes from experience. There's a moment when an elderly man at the hardware store, Tom, squints at Jack as he watches him easily lift a heavy box of nails with one arm. Tom, curious, but respectful. Military. Jack simply offers a small smile, neither confirming nor denying. Jack, something like that. Tom nods, as if he already knew the answer. But Karen doesn't see these things. She doesn't notice the way Jack moves with practiced efficiency, or the way he reacts faster than anyone else when a waitress at the diner drops a tray and he catches a falling plate before it shatters. She only sees what she wants to see, and what she sees is a nobody, a drifter who doesn't belong. Escalating encounters. Encounter number 1, Karen's public display. By the next afternoon, Karen has decided that she isn't finished proving her dominance. Jack is minding his own business again, this time at a small outdoor farmer's market in the town square. He's browsing the produce, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with vendors, when he hears a familiar, condescending voice ring out. Karen, loudly, ensuring everyone hears. Oh, look who it is. Jack exhales slowly, setting down the apple he was about to buy. He turns just in time to see Karen strutting toward him, her manicured nails clicking against her overpriced purse. A few nearby people freeze, already sensing the brewing conflict. Karen mocking. Didn't expect to see you here. Shopping for supplies. Are we? Do you even have a home? Jack doesn't take the bait. He offers a neutral expression, but he doesn't leave either. Jack, just supporting local businesses. Karen scoffs. Karen, how quaint. But let's be honest, you don't really fit in at places like this, do you? She glances around, making sure she has an audience. A few people shift uncomfortably, but no one intervenes. Jack remains still, patient. Karen leans in slightly, lowering her voice but keeping the smugness intact. Karen, mock whisper. I don't know what game you're playing, but you don't belong here. And trust me, sweetheart, people like me, we decide who stays and who goes. Jack studies her for a moment, then speaks in a voice so quiet it forces her to lean in closer to hear. Jack, that's so. There's something about the way he says it. Calm, almost amused. That makes Karen's confidence falter for just a second. But she covers it quickly, flashing her signature smirk before flipping her hair and sauntering off, feeling victorious. What she doesn't realize is that she's just set something in motion. Encounter number 2. The parking lot. That evening, Jack walks back to his truck after grabbing a late dinner at a local diner. The parking lot is dimly lit, mostly empty except for a few scattered vehicles. As he approaches, he notices something off. A piece of paper is tucked under his windshield wiper. Frowning, he pulls it free and reads the hastily scribbled words. People like you don't last long here. Consider this your warning. Jack stares at the note for a long moment. His grip tightens slightly, but his expression doesn't change. Then, without hesitation, he crumples the note in his fist and tosses it into the nearest trash can. He doesn't even look around to see if someone's watching, because he already knows they are. Without a word, he climbs into his truck and starts the engine, his movements calm, deliberate, unaffected. But inside, a slow, familiar fire is starting to burn. Encounter number 3, the provocation. The next day, Jack is at the local general store, picking up supplies, when Karen makes her boldest move yet. This time, she doesn't just use words. This time she gets physical. She spots him near the checkout counter, casually browsing through some tools, and marches straight toward him. Without warning, she slaps the items out of his hands. The entire store goes silent. A few gasps echo through the aisles. The cashier freezes behind the counter. A man near the refrigerated section grips his shopping basket a little tighter. Jack doesn't move. Karen, standing too close now, eyes burning with smug triumph, tilt her chin up. Karen, mocking, taunting. Oops. Clumsy me. She waits for him to react. Waits for him to snap, to lose his temper, to make a scene, to do anything that would justify the police report she's already ready to file. But instead, Jack just slowly bends down and picks up the items. One by one. No rush. No anger. No reaction. Karen's smirk flickers. She wants a reaction. She needs a reaction. Jack stands up, dusts off the items, and places them back on the shelf. Then, finally, he looks at her, and he smiles. It's not a friendly smile. It's not an angry one either. It's the kind of smile that unsettles people, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that says you have no idea who you're dealing with. Karen's smirk vanishes. For the first time, she looks nervous. Jack steps past her, his voice even casual. Jack, soft, almost amused. Be careful, Karen. You might not like how this ends. And just like that, he walks away. Karen stands frozen in place, her fists clenched, her breath uneven. For the first time, she isn't sure if she's the one in control. Cliffhangers and suspense build up. Jack has remained restrained. But for how long? Karen is getting bolder, but she doesn't realize she's poking the wrong bear. And now, the audience is waiting. Waiting for Jack to finally reveal who he really is. Waiting for Karen to push too far. And most importantly, waiting for justice. Jack doesn't need to prove himself to Karen. Not with words. Not with threats. But actions? Actions speak for themselves. The day after Karen's public outburst at the general store, Jack finds himself at a local veteran charity event. It's a small gathering at the town's community center, organized by some of the older veterans in the area. Jack had planned on keeping his profile low, but when one of the men, Tom, asks him to lend a hand, he doesn't refuse. Before long, Jack is working alongside a few others, setting up tables, organizing supplies, and assisting some of the older vets with moving heavy equipment. And that's when people start to notice. Despite his quiet nature, Jack moves with precision. His every action is efficient, controlled, purposeful. There's an ease to the way he lifts a crate of donated goods, muscles barely straining, while two younger men struggle with half the weight. At one point, a group gathers around an obstacle course that's been set up as a fun challenge for attendees. It's nothing serious, just a few climbing ropes, balance beams, and hurdles meant to simulate military training exercises. Tom, watching Jack from across the field, nudges one of the other vets. Tom, with a knowing smirk, bet you he could run that course blindfolded. The others chuckle. Someone nearby must have overheard because before long, a crowd forms, and the challenge is made. One of the younger men, Mike, a former Marine, jokingly calls out. Mike, grinning. Hey, Jack, think you still got it? Jack, who had been tying down a tent pole, glances up. His expression is unreadable. Jack, calm, neutral. You asking or daring me? Laughter ripples through the crowd. Someone claps Mike on the back. Mike, grinning. Both. Jack exhales, sets his gloves down, and steps up to the starting line. No hesitation. No unnecessary words. And then, he moves. What happens next shocks everyone. Jack doesn't just complete the course. He destroys it. He scales the climbing ropes with effortless efficiency, his movements smooth and practiced. He clears the hurdles with perfect form, never losing balance. The balance beam? He sprints across it without breaking stride. But the moment that makes the crowd go silent, when Jack reaches the final section, a wall climb, he doesn't use the footholds like everyone else before him. Instead, with a single calculated leap, he grips the top of the wall and pulls himself over in one smooth motion. Absolute silence. Then, an eruption of cheers. Tom whistles low, shaking his head with admiration. Tom, grinning. Hell, son, you sure you're not still active duty? Jack, barely winded, just smirks, but standing at the edge of the field, watching with narrowed eyes. Karen, and she looks furious. Resilience under pressure. Karen had been so sure she had Jack figured out. To her, he was just a drifter, a nobody, a man beneath her status, someone she could toy with and discard at will. But now, the entire town is looking at him differently. And Karen hates it. The following day, she doubles down. At the coffee shop, she loudly tells anyone who will listen that Jack must be some kind of fraud. Karen, mocking, condescending. People like him, they lie all the time. You think he's really some more hero? Please. You probably learned that obstacle course stunt from YouTube. But the more she tries to discredit him, the more people push back. Even people who once ignored Jack now defend him. Tom, the veteran who had been watching the course, finally speaks up. Tom, firm, unimpressed. You don't know what you're talking about, Karen. That man, he's the real deal. I've seen enough in my time to recognize it. Others nod in agreement. Karen's face flushes red, but she doesn't back down. If anything, it fuels her rage. That evening, Jack is leaving the general store when Karen shows up again. This time, she blocks his path. Her arms are crossed, her jaw tight, eyes flashing with barely contained fury. Karen, venomous. I don't know who you think you are, but let me make one thing clear. This is my town. I decide who stays and who doesn't. Jack, unfazed, simply tilts his head. Jack, calm, amused. That right. Karen steps closer, her voice lowering to a harsh whisper. Karen, mocking. You don't belong here. And trust me, sweetheart, I have ways of making people disappear. It's a threat. A clear, undeniable threat. But Jack just chuckles. Karen blinks. She expected anger. She expected fear. She expected anything other than laughter. Jack leans in slightly, voice low but filled with a quiet authority that makes the hair on Karen's neck stand up. Jack, soft, dangerous. You have no idea who you're talking to, Karen. And with that, he walks away, leaving Karen standing there, speechless. Building audience, expectation. Karen is losing control. She knows it. Jack knows it. And now the audience knows something big is coming. Karen has been pushing and pushing, but she doesn't realize she's already past the point of no return. And Jack Jack has let it slide long enough. The town is watching. The tension is at its peak. Something is about to break. And when it does, Karen won't see it coming. The final straw comes on a bright afternoon at the town square. Karen, still seething, is determined to put Jack in his place once and for all. She's gathered a small crowd, her usual enablers, a few bystanders, and even some curious townsfolk who have started to question her obsession with Jack. Jack, for his part, is just buying a cup of coffee, minding his business. That's when Karen strikes. She storms over, fake smiling, but her voice dripping with mocking sweetness. Karen, loudly, for everyone to hear. You know, Jack, I've been thinking. If you really were some big-shot veteran, wouldn't people know you? I mean, surely there'd be records, proof, something. Jack doesn't respond immediately. He just takes a sip of his coffee. Karen, smirking, pushing further. Or maybe you're just a liar. Maybe you're not a real soldier. Maybe you're just some drifter pretending to be something you're not. There it is. The insult she's been dying to throw at him. The crowd goes still. A few people murmur, shifting uncomfortably. Some exchange glances. They've all seen Jack's discipline, his unshakable composure, his instinctive awareness. Things that don't just come from nowhere. But Karen? She's too blinded by her own arrogance to see the trap she's walking into. Jack, calm as ever, sets his coffee down on a nearby table. Then, he finally speaks. Jack, quiet, steady. You really want to know who I am, Karen? The shift in his tone is subtle, but people notice. Karen folds her arms, smirking. She thinks she's won. Karen mocking. Oh, please enlighten me. Jack reaches into his back pocket and pulls out a small, weathered wallet. And from inside, he removes an ID card. A military ID. But not just any military ID. One with a name that makes several people in the crowd gasp. Tom, the veteran who had watched Jack at the obstacle course, goes pale. His eyes widen as he steps forward. Tom, stunned, barely a whisper. Holy hell. Karen's smirk fades. She's not expecting this reaction. Jack flips the ID around, revealing a rank and a title that instantly shifts the energy of the entire moment. Jack Carter, U.S. Army Special Forces. A highly decorated veteran. A former elite operator. A man with a background far beyond anything Karen could have imagined. The crowd is dead silent. Karen? She freezes. Karen, stammering. Well, what is this supposed to prove? Jack lets out a quiet chuckle. Jack, tilting his head, amused. It proves I'm not some drifter. It proves that while you were throwing tantrums over expired coupons, I was halfway across the world, keeping people like you safe. A few people in the crowd murmur in shock. Karen's face drains of color. Jack doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His calm intensity says it all. Jack, taking a step closer. You wanted to know why I don't lose my temper? Why I don't lash out when you shove me, insult me, or get in my face? Karen swallows hard. Jack, deadly quiet. Because I've been trained to handle actual threats. And Karen. He leans in slightly. Jack, soft, final. You're not one. The power shift is instant. Power shift. Karen stumbles back, her bravado crumbling in real time. The crowd isn't laughing at Jack anymore. They're staring at her. For the first time, she feels small. For the first time, she realizes she's lost control of the narrative. The people she's been manipulating for years, the ones who always backed her up, they're not looking at her the same way anymore. Tom, the veteran who immediately recognized Jack's name, steps forward. His voice is steady but laced with admiration. Tom, shaking his head, still in shock. Jack Carter. They used to call you Ghost. Karen blinks. Karen, nervous, looking around. What does that even mean? Tom lets out a low whistle. Tom, explaining to the crowd. It means that while we were serving, his name carried weight. It means he was on missions the rest of us only heard rumors about. The weight of those words settles over everyone. Even the people who didn't know much about the military can feel the shift. Karen shakes her head, scrambling. Karen, voice rising, desperate. This is ridiculous. I don't care what some piece of plastic says. He's just some washed up. Tom, cutting her off firm. Show some damn respect. Karen flinches. She's never been spoken to like that before. Tom looks to Jack and extends a hand. Jack shakes it, and in that moment, the entire town sees it clearly. Jack isn't just respected now. He's admired. The people who once dismissed him, who saw him as just another quiet nobody, they now see the truth. Karen? Karen is done. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. Some shake their heads, disgusted at her behavior. Karen takes a shaky step back. For the first time in her life, she's afraid. Not because Jack has threatened her, but because he hasn't. Because she knows that if Jack had been the man she wanted him to be, a hothead, an idiot, a nobody she could control, he would have taken the bait long ago. Instead, he let her destroy herself. And now, everyone sees her for what she truly is. A bully, a fraud, and most importantly, powerless. Karen stands there, frozen, her face pale. The weight of her own actions settles over her as she watches the crowd turn against her. The people she used to manipulate, the ones who always took her side, laughed at her jokes, backed her up, now they're staring at her with disgust. Tom, the veteran who immediately recognized Jack, shakes his head. Tom, low, disappointed. You had no idea who you were messing with, did you? Karen swallows hard, her hands trembling. She glances around, hoping, praying, that someone will step up and defend her. But no one does. A woman in the crowd scoffs. Woman, arms crossed, disgusted. I can't believe we ever listened to you. A younger man shakes his head. Young man, to Karen, shaking his head. So what now? Gonna throw a tantrum? Cry harassment again? Karen stiffens. For the first time in her life, her usual tactics aren't working. No manipulation, no fake tears, no outrage, just silence. Her reputation is crumbling before her eyes. Then, the final blow lands. A police officer steps forward from the back of the crowd. Sergeant Davis, a man who's had to deal with Karen's entitled nonsense one too many times. He's seen enough. Sergeant Davis, calm but firm. Karen Williams, I think it's time we had a little chat down at the station. Karen spins around, eyes wide. Karen, panicked, fake laughing. Wait. What? You can't be serious. For what? The sergeant raises an eyebrow. Sergeant Davis, counting on his fingers. Assault. Filing false reports. Repeated harassment. Disorderly conduct. Should I keep going? Karen stares in horror. She tries to argue, tries to backpedal, but there's nothing left for her to stand on. She lashes out one last time, her voice shrill. Karen, desperate, screaming at Jack. This is your fault. You set me up. Jack just shrugs, his face unreadable. Jack, calmly, sipping his coffee. All I did was exist. That simple sentence hits harder than anything else. Because it's true. Karen did this to herself. Sergeant Davis nods to his officers. They move in, guiding Karen away as she shrieks, flails, and protests. But it's useless. The last thing anyone hears is Karen's voice fading into the distance. The once loudest, most entitled woman in town, now just another disgraced figure with nothing left. Triumphant close. As the police car pulls away, the crowd remains still for a moment, processing everything that just happened. Then, slowly, they turn to Jack. The once ignored veteran is now the center of attention, but not in the way Karen tried to paint him. Not as a nobody, or a drifter, or a liar, but as a man who carried himself with dignity. A man who won without ever needing to fight back. Tom steps forward, giving Jack a nod of deep respect. Tom grinning. You ever need a drink, man? It's on me. Jack chuckles. Jack, smirking. Careful. I've got a strong tolerance. The crowd laughs, the tension finally breaking. A woman in her 40s, a local business owner, speaks up. Woman, smiling at Jack. We could use a man like you around here. If you're looking for work, I'd be honored to have you on board. Jack pauses, considering it. For the first time in years, he feels like he belongs. Not because he had to prove anything, but because they finally see him for who he truly is. And that's all he ever really wanted. Jack nods, offering a small, genuine smile. Jack, grateful, sincere. I'd like that. Final reflection. Later that evening, Jack sits at the park bench, overlooking the quiet town as the sun sets. He takes a deep breath. For the first time in years, he feels at peace. No more running. No more being a ghost. Just Jack Carter, a man who's been through hell and back, but still stands. A familiar voice pulls him from his thoughts. Tom. The old veteran sits beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. Tom, smirking. You ever think you'd settle down in a place like this? Jack chuckles, shaking his head. Jack softly. Didn't think I'd settle anywhere. Tom nods, understanding exactly what he means. There's a long pause before Tom speaks again. This time, more serious. Tom, quiet, thoughtful. You know, there's a lesson in all this. Jack raises an eyebrow. Jack amused. Oh yeah? What's that? Tom smirks. Tom grinning. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let them destroy themselves. Jack lets that sink in. He looks out at the town, at the people who now see him as more than just a stranger. He smiles. For the first time in a long time, Jack Carter isn't just a name on ID. He's home. And that's the greatest victory of all. Closing message. This story isn't just about Karen getting what she deserves. It's about strength without violence. It's about integrity in the face of injustice. And most importantly, it's about how the truth always wins in the end. Jack didn't need to fight Karen. He just needed to stand his ground. And in doing so, he proved that real power isn't about force. It's about character. And that's a lesson worth remembering. The end.